Mike Bellotti here with us on ScoopDuck in Hi-Fi. Coach, I'm so excited for this. We had you on last year, really early in the history of this podcast, and we peppered you with history and stories and learned about your past. But now I get to ask you about something really, really, really recent. You were at Ducks practice last week. What was the biggest takeaway for you?
I think that there's more depth. They're bigger physically. They've got some length at the right positions, like the outside linebacker spot. The offensive line is massive. Justin Herbert is in rare form already. They had good energy. They acted like they liked each other and respected each other. There was great competition, but at the same time, they were excited about people making plays. And so, when you watch a team, and I think that was the fourth or fifth or sixth practice, I'm not sure exactly, and they'd had a day off, and Coach had complained that they were a little rusty from the day off. But overall, I was impressed by what I saw. I think there's athleticism, and as I said, the kids seem to like football. And I think we sort of don't really give that its due sometimes in terms of what that means.
And that's a great point, Coach. It's obviously it's really hard to quantify, how much a kid loves football. He kind of either does or he doesn't, I suppose, for the most part. But, leading off that question, I know you answered along the way, but, you were able to, watch practice last year and see Coach Cristobal in action last year. We're fast forward a year. What, maybe besides depth and length, what are maybe a couple of the other things that you've seen are the biggest difference between that team at that point and this team at this point?
Well, the coaches, there's great energy from the coaches, and they're all coaching their tails off and giving the right kind of feedback, positive when it needs to be positive and negative when it needs to be negative, and communicating with the various players. I think that there's more competition at the receiver position. They have some length there. Juwan Johnson, obviously, the transfer is a big physical target. Micah Pittman, I think, is not that tall, but he's a very good athlete that looks like he's ready to help in a variety of roles. I think they've got depth at the running back position. I think they've got depth in the offensive line and at tight end, although they've had some dings there. Defensively, it's tough to tell because they're still learning. But overall, I think Andy Avilo's system, the kids seem to feel very comfortable with it. The coaches are coaching within it and probably learning. You don't learn it, but you just stay in a couple steps ahead because for some there may be some new terminology, and everybody has to get used to that. But the transition looks to be going fairly well.
Coach, I just caught you name dropping that true freshman wideout, Micah Pittman. His story amazes me, and I want to think back to your years at the helm. Did you ever have a true freshman wideout come close to the contribution that Duck fans are expecting from Micah?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I think we had some true freshmen play, but I don't know that any are going to be poised. Now, he came, I think, last spring, so he's had a spring ball and a fall camp under his belt, and obviously we didn't do that back in the old days. I say the old days, but the reality is now these kids are more ready because, one, they've been trained specifically for football for a long time, but they also have gone through spring practice, which allows the coaches to evaluate them on how they accept coaching. They understand the techniques, they understand the drills, and then they had a summer to practice with their teammates and to work on coverages, communication, all that type of thing. And now fall camp, it's not a strange thing. It's not something new thrown at them. It's almost review, and the pace can go a little faster for the coaches in terms of insertion and teaching because these young players who are physically gifted and ready to play now have the experience within the program, the understanding and knowledge of the terminology, which sometimes can be a factor in allowing a young man to play or not, and then also the speed of the game because they've been exposed to it both in spring ball and in the summer 1-on-1s and 7-on-7, that type of thing.
One of the things I want to ask you off of that, Coach, and you'll be able to better explain it than myself, is, we hear the current Oregon coaches talking about the reaction time. They're able to, do things quicker, like you mentioned, at a faster pace because the reaction time is a lot better. They're not having to process things. Is that something that maybe you're talking about as well, that, these guys are able to read and react much quicker because they, don't have to take as much time processing the things they had to process last year?
Exactly. And the reality is when you take a new freshman player, incoming player, whether it's freshman or JC or whatever the case may be, you have three issues. You have one of just the terminology, the language barrier. How do I call this, and how do I translate that into my thinking? So this cover is this coverage. This thing is this coverage. This is a blitz. This is a dog. This is a whatever. And so once you get past that and you don't have to think about, okay, does that mean? Then secondarily, you're looking at how quickly can you respond physically once you see it happen. And when you've never seen it happen before for the first time, you're going, oh, wait a second, I got to get to here a lot faster. These young men, like I said, by virtue of spring ball and the summer conditioning program, they know it. And then the speed of the game. We talk about this all the time, though. Everybody's faster. Everybody's the best of the best from what young people played against in high school. So the reality is the game just moves faster, the ball's thrown harder, the windows are smaller, all those type of things. So it's a combination of all those things that allow players now to play at an early age. And the coaches have to try to simplify things, which they do. I think every coach over time, you try to find a way, how can I make it the most simple, logical approach so these kids can come in and from day one, they can compete. I'm not going to set them over there and say, you're not good enough yet, because they are physically good enough. They have the physical skills, the strength training, the speed training, etc., to compete if they don't have to stop and think about what they're doing.
Talking with Mike Bellotti, Coach, first question you answered, you said that out of all the differences you saw and all the things that caught your eye, these Duck players love playing football. And I'd love to know, how do you find that out? How did you know that?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's just a second sense that a coach has, because I think you can tell when people are faking it. I think you can tell when people really enjoy the game and are excited about the opportunity just to be out there. And I think one of the things you always look for when you recruit, and we used to ask this, was how much does he really love football? Because there are people that love wearing the uniform. There are people that love the publicity. There are people that love, cheering crowds. But they may not love football when down deep it goes the other way. And we got to find out how tough this young man and how much he really cares about his teammates as much or more than himself, and how much he's willing to sacrifice. So I think my initial impression, and I was watching, like I said, the fifth or sixth practices of fall camp, was that this team liked football. The guys that were on the sideline weren't feeling sorry for themselves and weren't out of it and happy to be out of practice. They wanted to be involved with practice, and the guys that were there practicing made the most of every opportunity, whether it's a mental rep by watching what happens on the field or a physical rep of getting a chance to get in there. Because I think they all know that this is a dress rehearsal. And the reality is, if you have 85 scholarships and 115 or 120 players out there, every single one of them has a chance to be part of what's happening and play during the season.
Right.
Coach, I want to ask you about Coach Cristobal specifically, and I know you won't want to be overly critical, or he may not let you back at practice, but one of the things that in my experience is there's a lot of good coaches out there, but the great coaches continue to evolve, continue to learn from their mistakes. And if you were assessing Coach Cristobal from last year to this point, what are some of the ways that you think he might have improved himself just in that year span as a head coach?
Well, I think obviously the big question marks were the start of the Washington State game and the entire Arizona game. And I think it's trying to make sure as a head coach your approach is even keel. It's about us getting better. It doesn't matter about our opponent. We don't want to play up to one opponent and down to another. we want to set our level. And I think Coach Cristobal, I like what he says. I like the way he communicates. I like the way he recruits. I think he's done a great job recruiting. Now he has to prove that he and his staff can develop that talent and can have, the great players stay at a high level, but then the other players come up to that level. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, too, I think his coaching staff now is more a reflection of who and what he wants. They seem to be a more cohesive unit, even though there's some new coaches on the staff. I think that's always good. It's nice to bring in coaches with a different perspective sometimes. He brought in consultants in the off season to help them address some of their issues on offense, and how ways to use Justin Herbert to make sure he performs at the highest level possible. And one of the things, just so you know, Coach Cristobal and I talked after every game last year, and he said, Coach, I don't want a yes, sir. I don't want a attaboy. I want you to be critical and to be honest. And I said, okay, that's great, because I won't mince any words. I'll tell you what I think you guys did well and what you didn't do well and where you need to improve and what players or coaches or schemes may not be the most efficient right now. And he was very willing to listen. And I'm a fan. I'm also, I think he's doing a very good job. But obviously, this is a big year. They picked to win their division, compete for the conference championship. They have a return. And part of it, too, is the staff he put together, the players they've recruited, the players they've retained. And you talk about guys like Troy Dye and Justin Herbert coming back for their senior years when they both could have gone to the NFL. That's somewhat unheard of. So it sort of points to what they believe in terms of Coach Cristobal, what they like about Eugene and the University of Oregon and the football program.
Coach, I know you're probably pretty satisfied with your current life situation, but I'm going to ask you a two-parter here. Is this a team that you would not mind coming out of retirement to coach? And secondly, where do you think this team ends up at the end of the year, just off what you've seen?
I'd love to coach this team. I'd love to coach a team that's already been put together and has got some pretty good players and seems to have a great attitude about the game. I like the coaching staff. They have energy. They seem to be unselfish. They seem to do a good job of working through issues, because that's one of the things that it's all rosy, and when things go good and you win a game and everything's fine, it's when things don't go well that you find out how good a coach you are. I think this team is going to compete for the division title, is going to compete for the conference championship, and certainly would be one of the best representatives for the Pac-12 in the college football playoff. I think that they still have to prove that they have a receiver core, that they have multiple weapons there that can affect the defense and help Justin Herbert. I think the defense has to still prove that they can make the transition to a new coordinator. They lost several key pass rushers last year and a couple of pretty good stalwart defensive players in the front seven. They should be better in the secondary, I believe, although Ugo Amadi not being there is going to hurt them. But so I think this is a team that if they cannot fall asleep on the road, and I really mean that, they've got to play as well on the road as they do at home. And obviously they start off with a huge game against Auburn, supposedly neutral field. I'm not sure I'd call it that. But the reality is that's a huge game for Oregon, a huge game for the Pac-12, because the outcome of that game is going to sort of put a huge vision stamp on the Pac-12. If Oregon wins, then I think, and Auburn is a very good team, maybe not a great team in the SEC, but a very good team, and their coach is under a lot of pressure. So they're feeling the heat to come out and win that first game too. So I think we'll know a lot more after that first game, just in terms of how this group of kids and coaches matches up, because Auburn will be hungry for that game.
Coach, I agree wholeheartedly with you about, I guess, finding out where Oregon's at on the road. Obviously, that's been an issue the past couple of years, whether it's under Coach Cristobal or Coach Taggart or whatnot. So I think that's probably first and foremost in my, concern column. Secondly, to me, and I'm going to ask you about this, I believe, and I've said this for a while, I think this team goes as far as number 10 takes them, as far as Herbert can take them. And I say that knowing that he's got first-round potential, he's got all the tangibles, but there are times where he might make a few mistakes. You kind of wonder, wow, that's not very Herbert-like. Do you somewhat agree with that assessment? I think number 10 is the second biggest key to this team, and it sounds like, from what you saw, he's probably ready to do that.
I think he's really, really good. I said that last year, and I think he was his own worst enemy at times, because I think there were certain times where he lacked confidence in some of the other receivers, and he forced the ball or held the ball to wait for Dylan Mitchell to get open. And when it didn't happen, he ended up taking a loss or taking a sack or forcing the ball. And I think he's got to understand that you can throw it away and come back to play another day. And he's good enough to know that. He has to demonstrate that for the NFL at the next level. They won't always be open. But I also think that he'll have more weapons, and I think they're going to try and do some things, even though I think the pistol is still the focus of this offense, and it's a run-first type deal. But with bigger offensive linemen, with a healthy group of backs, they should be efficient in the running game and allow Justin Herbert to throw more often when he wants to throw rather than when he has to throw. And that's a huge key for an offense, is when you can throw when you want to throw on either or downs or 50-50 downs, then the defense doesn't have a significant advantage. But when you're throwing it and it's 2nd and 12 or 3rd and 10 or something like that, those are downs where the defense can dictate a little bit of where you go with the ball and whether they're going to do pressure or coverage. And I think, like I said last year, after the first half of the season, I helped him pack his bags for the NFL. I thought he was that ready and that good. He did digress the second half of the season in a manner that some people were shocked about. I think it was some just growth things, but it was also the lack of depth in the receiver position and maybe some play calling that put him into a not a rut, but just continued to come up and having to throw on a 3rd down after running the ball twice.
Mike Bellotti with a real nice endorsement of Justin Herbert and his NFL talent on top of the collegiate one this fall. Coach, my household, we were huge Mike Bellotti fans growing up, and the Fiesta Bowl win was probably my favorite Ducks memory growing up. So it's always an honor to speak to you, and we're really thankful for your time today.
Thanks, guys, and I'm excited about this Duck team. I think we all should be.
Awesome. Thank you, Coach, and we'll have you back again soon.
Okay.